Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Convention show, Krystal. So what do we got?
Indeed, we do. Always exciting. So we got Ryan Grimm on. He's actually not going to talk about the convention. He's going to talk about Joe Kennedy crying about how mean Ed Markey supporters are. Poor guy. We also have Kyle Kulinski on to compare the DNC and the RNC. We've got Marshall Kosloff on to break down Tim Scott's keynote speech last night. And we do, of course, want to start with night one of the RNC. All the good and also all the bad.
That's right. So we'll start off with the good because I think that we owe it to them. Overall, both of our impressions were, look, the production value on this thing, pretty good. And overall, not as cringy as I actually thought it would be. And I thought that the best moment I think both of us did was with a moment where Trump was talking with some of the workers who had worked during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's just take a listen to that.
These are my friends. These are the incredible workers that helped us so much with the COVID. We can call it many different things, from China virus. I don't want to go through all the names because some people may get insulted, but that's the way it is. These are great, great people, doctors, nurses, firemen, policemen. We want to thank you all. You have been incredible, and we want to thank you and all of the millions of people that you represent. Thank you all very much. Great job. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what it could. It's interesting. I was watching it and I was like, well, look, we've, covered the actual how they've handled the pandemic, how they've handled the economic crisis and all that. But you have to give it to them. It was a good commercial in terms of, if you watch that, you're like, oh man, they've been taking care of these essential workers. They really appreciate them. They've been making sure that everybody's okay. Of course, that's not necessarily the case for both parties, by the way. But overall, I thought the Republican messaging on it with Trump himself, it was more humanizing. And I think that something I saw, this was an observation from Henry Olsen, who's a very interesting political commentator. He said that because the Democrats didn't really run on some sort of policy-wide agenda, they ran on Trump himself, unique threat, odious, norms breaking, that the RNC's counter messaging had to focus on Trump himself. And that all they really need to prove to disprove the Obama case, it's almost like a jury, is to be like, no, actually, this guy's not that bad. And then once you start thinking about policy and you start thinking about that, you can weigh things differently. It's just a different emotive response, and I thought that a clip like that was pretty effective.
There was also a real question over whether the messaging of this convention would be like, we're good to go.
Yes,
Coronavirus is over. Way to go, everybody. This was never a big deal. And so let's be clear, this is all gaslighting. The American people lived through how they didn't take it seriously at the beginning, and then they started to, and then they backed off again. So everybody lived through all of that. And so I'm not sure that the gaslighting actually overwhelmingly works. But when I turned on, I missed actually the first couple of speeches. I turned it on right at 9 p.m. And that's when they started with, they brought on a registered nurse who was the daughter of a coal miner in West Virginia. And she delivered a very effective message that was actually factually grounded about telehealth.
That's right.
And how important that is and how important it's going to be going forward. Then we had Trump with this group of workers. And actually the part that we showed there wasn't even really the best part where he's talking about, it's the China virus or whatever. There was a very natural, comfortable, sort of charming
affable
engagement with these workers who, came off very well. It's funny because in both the RNC and the DNC, I feel like the regular people that they brought front and center really made the case better than any of the politicians ultimately did. And so when I was watching that in the montages, you're right, they were so beautifully produced. And it was like a lot of it
shots and columns.
Well, a lot of it was revisionist history. But on the theater points,
it's good.
They did a good job. The staging looked beautiful. The montages were beautifully cut together. That one in particular, at kind of the beginning of the night about coronavirus, I thought was incredibly effectively done. So I was like, oh my God, they actually have figured this thing out, and this is going to be a problem. Then the evening went on, and it went a little bit off the rails. It
did. I do want to highlight one thing that I thought was very astute, and this was from Ronna McDaniel, who kind of goes back to the Henry Olsen point that I was making, which was about she targeted in on what the core message of the DNC was Joe Biden is a nice guy, and Donald Trump is, the next iteration of Satan. And she made that case very clearly, being like, look, all they have to say is this, that Joe Biden is a nice guy, and a lot of stuff about Trump. Repeating that over and over again, I think, is very effective if you're trying to fill in with a more positive message. Now, look, I mean, there's some of the message is, not based in reality economically and so much more, but I want to take a listen to what she said.
If you watched the DNC last week, you probably noticed that Democrats spent a lot of time talking about how much they despise our president. But we heard very little about their actual policies. Policies that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Policies like banning fossil fuels, eliminating private health insurance, taxpayer-funded health care for people who come here illegally, and defunding the police. Their argument for Joe Biden boiled down to the fact that they think he's a nice guy.
I think that's actually a pretty effective message. I mean, if you look at it that way, see, this is what always annoys me about them is that they'll be like, oh, he's a Trojan horse for socialism. I'm like, no, that's much better. Just be like, they think he's a nice guy. What's behind that is more of the same, status quo. Now, that's not what she was saying.
Right.
I heard a little bit of that from Don Jr., which actually, delivery of the speech wasn't exactly the best. But on a textual level, I was actually surprised.
I couldn't really listen to the speech. I couldn't get over the way his eyes looked and whatever was going on with him.
Something is going on.
Kimberly Guilfoyle. Yeah. We'll put that to the side for the moment. I mean, but she's right.
Yeah.
Like, it's refreshing to hear that kind of honesty. That is basically the case that Democrats are making for Joe Biden, is he's a nice guy. The problem for Republicans is it actually lands with a lot of people. I mean, it's part of why Joe Biden was so hard to run against in the Democratic primary. It's part of why he's very hard to run against in the general election, because when people think you're a basically decent person, they are willing to overlook a lot because they trust that your intentions are in the right place. So she's right. On substance, the DNC was like completely absent of substance. We talked about that here, and how unconscionable that is in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a Great Depression. Of course, you could say a lot of the same things about the RNC.
Yeah.
I mean,
and to the extent there was substance, like with Tim Scott's speech, which we'll talk about later, it's dramatically unpopular economic policy.
Right, exactly, right. Or it's like, their culture war stuff, which, if you're going to do that for your base, you have to also provide a majoritarian economic positioning, which they have failed to do. I don't think that Joe Biden is a nice guy and it's not enough is really that effective messaging ultimately, because the big problem that Republicans fundamentally have is right now, Trump, he's got the base. They're excited the way that they were in 2016, more or less, very enthusiastic. They got their boats down, all that stuff, right? But that is actually not enough. You have to add to that the people that hate both candidates, the people who are disgusted all the way around, the people who are going to vote against the Democrats. And Hillary Clinton, the case that they made against her in 2016 was just way more effective. And so this gets into the not good part of the evening. The part where they featured the workers and they're talking about this, look, is gaslighting. But it was very effective, right? And he was very good in that particular setting. But then as the night goes on, they get into this existential case about Joe Biden and the radical left and all this stuff. Kicked off, actually, this was early on in the night by Matt Gaetz. Let's get a taste of that messaging against Joe Biden.
Settle for Biden. That's the hashtag promoted by AOC and the socialists. The Woketopians will settle for Biden because they will make him an extra in a movie written, produced, and directed by others. It's a horror film, really. They'll disarm you, empty the prisons, lock you in your home, and invite MS-13 to live next door.
Look, it's just not going to sell that Joe Biden is some radical leftist.
People don't believe that about
People don't buy it.
Even if it might be true. Some of it is.
And they even cut together a whole montage of Bernie and AOC and Ilhan and Biden as if he's being just puppet mastered by these people. And look, I'm sure it lands with the base. They buy it.
Yes,
they believe it. But they don't need to buy it and believe it. You need these other group of people who aren't really crazy about Joe. They're not really crazy about Trump. And they're trying to figure out where to be. Those are the people that ultimately, last time around, they turned them all against Hillary because they had an effective message about her being the status quo and her being corrupt.
She's corrupt,
That really landed. They just don't have anything with Joe that sticks, and he's a nice guy isn't going to work, and definitely he's a radical leftist whatever is not going to work either.
I'm going to be talking about this in my radar, but some of the most odious people on earth, from people who are Iraq beaters, torturers, and Wall Streeters, are all lining up very enthusiastically for Joe Biden. Now, I wish I could hear that message from the RNC.
Yeah.
But the truth is they can't do that because many of the same Wall Street people are backing them. I just saw a clip this morning, which I wanted to share with all of you because it's so funny. There was some hedge fund guy who was on CNBC, and he's like, I'm fiscally conservative, I'm socially liberal. I just feel like neither party is for me right now. I'm like, you own both of the parties. What are you talking about?
This is the subject of my radar.
Yeah.
This incredible Washington Post op-ed where he's like, how come the Democrats aren't more pro-business?
Yeah.
Like, what world are you living in?
I know.
Jesus Christ. Put that aside.
I'm like, no, the truth is you own both of them.
Oh, my God. Yeah, and so, look, the other thing is there was a messaging, and I think this messaging is going to carry throughout the RNC. Last night we had a gentleman from Cuba, very emotionally.
Right. Every night. It's
comparing Joe Biden to Fidel Castro. I mean, who really I don't think there's a large audience for that messaging. But look, I get they're like trying to target it on Florida. If you want to win Florida, why don't you play those clips of Joe Biden saying you wanted to cut Social Security?
Yes.
That's going to work much, much more than trying to excite a Cuban audience that is already firmly in your camp, right?
You can't do that because there are a lot of Republicans who want to cut Social Security.
Well, there you go. That's the problem. Nikki Haley would be like, I protest.
Yeah,
Now would be like, wait, where did this come from?
But the most bizarre moment of the night was Kimberly Guilfoyle. No words for what you're about to see if you didn't catch it live. Let's take a listen.
They want to destroy this country and everything that we have fought for and hold dear. They want to steal your liberty, your freedom. They want to control what you see and think and believe so that they can control how you live. They want to enslave you to the weak, dependent, liberal, victim ideology to the point that you will not recognize this country or yourself.
All right.
Went on just like that, in that tone, for however long, and it was terrifying.
Yeah, I saw a tweet which was like, I didn't even have the TV on, and I heard Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech all the way from hundreds
you
of
were
miles
like
away.
accosted by her speech, the whole thing. Again, I couldn't even focus on the words because I just felt so like assaulted by the tone of it. So it was a little over the top.
Yeah.
But in general, there were signs at the beginning. I was like, oh my God, they actually have figured out what they need to do in this election. And frankly, Biden's in trouble. But as the night wore on and they went back to the well again and again with essentially the mirror image of the Democrats' existential messaging around Trump of, they're going to take your liberty and you won't be safe to live anywhere and they're going to abolish the suburbs and all this. I was like, okay, you all are definitely missing the mark on this one.
My kind of take on this is that did work in 2016. I remember we watched the Trump campaign was a clown show, but with moments of brilliance, right? Like the trade messaging on China, on Hillary. I mean, there were just smatterings there that when you took it all together, you're like, wow. And, for every Judge Curiel moment and for every John McCain moment, all these other stupid things, the cereal box, I forgot about that one. It's like, there were these moments there you were like, wow, I can see why he's winning. I can see why he's connecting. And when he won, and in retrospect, you see that those things were enough to connect the dots. The question is that same thing. Is the 15 minutes of brilliance, are the shining smatterings of gold like in this thing, is that going to be okay? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Just given how crazy the political moment is and so much more. But I think he has a better shot today than he did yesterday. And I think that is something which it could, if Biden ends up losing, the ingredients are there for why he was undermined from the very beginning.
I think you're right. There were some glimpses there where you're like, okay, this is reconnecting with the things and the ingredients that you had back in 2016. The two things that to me are missing are an effective attack on Biden, which was really important. I mean, the attacks on Hillary were just as important as any sort of affirmative message. And there isn't actually any sort of affirmative vision message. Whereas last time you knew was like NAFTA and TPP, China, you had these ideas, immigration, you had this sense of what the agenda would look like. This time, I don't know what Biden's going to do. I also don't know what Trump's going to do.
Very true.
All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radars. That's next.